The well appeared before us, looking more ominous than ever in the morning light. That old instinct, the one that had kept me from following Larry down here years ago, screamed at me to turn back. This time, I forced it down. We shared one final look, drawing courage from each other's presence. And then I took the lead, gripping the rope and starting my descent. The beam of my flashlight, a proper one this time, not just a phone light, cut through the darkness below. When I reached the bottom, I understood why Missy had struggled to describe this place. The tunnels. Dear God, the tunnels. They sprawled in every direction, some horizontal, others diving at sickening angles into the earth. There were too many to count, each one a black mouth waiting to swallow us whole. Missy came down next, and I watched the color drain from her face as she took in the familiar sight. Her eyes went distant, like she was reliving that first terrible descent. I pulled her into a quick hug, whispering promises of protection that I wasn't sure I could keep. John's descent ended with a crash as the rope snapped halfway down. He hit the ground with a thud that echoed through the tunnels, sending up a cloud of dust. "Nice entrance, fatty," I quipped, trying to mask my concern with humor. He scrambled for his dropped flashlight, muttering, "Shut up," as he checked himself for injuries. We all stared at the labyrinth before us, the weak sunlight from above doing little to penetrate the overwhelming darkness. I turned to Missy, dreading the answer to my next question. Which tunnel did it drag it into? Does it matter? She gestured helplessly at the broken rope above. We're trapped down here anyway. Shh, there has to be another way out, I insisted, trying to sound more confident than I felt. No way there are this many tunnels without multiple exits. She scanned the options nervously before pointing to one of the sloped passages. That one, I'm almost certain. My stomach clenched. The tunnel she indicated plunged downward at a steep angle, smooth from years of use. Getting in would be easy, maybe too easy. Getting out would be another story entirely. I pulled the gun from my waistband and handed it to Missy, showing her the safety switch. If you hear me yell, or if anything comes up that tunnel without announcing itself first, you empty the clip. Don't stop until whatever it is stops moving. She nodded, her hands steady despite her fear. Looking back, I probably sounded ridiculous, like I was quoting lines from some B-grade action movie. But fear has a way of making you dramatic. Reality came crashing back as I faced that dark descent. This wasn't a movie. There would be no dramatic music to warn us of danger, no convenient last-minute rescues. Whatever waited below, we'd face it alone. I started down the tunnel, trying to control my slide, as sharp rocks caught at my clothes and skin. The darkness seemed to thicken as I descended, becoming almost physical, like it was trying to push me back up. When I finally reached the bottom, I found myself in another chamber, empty, save for more branching tunnels. We weren't in a simple cave system. We were in a maze. "All clear," I called up, then added, "When Larry disappeared, Missy ran into the woods first, but Larry was the first down the well." The personal detail was our makeshift password, proving it was really me calling. They joined me moments later, their faces showing the same mix of relief and disappointment I felt at finding the chamber empty. "Where to now?" Missy asked, gripping the gun like a lifeline. "Why does she get to keep the gun?" John whined, though his attempt at humor couldn't quite mask his fear. "Because she can actually hit what she aims at," I said, studying our options. "And honestly, I have no idea where we go from here." We chose tunnels at random, descending deeper into the earth's embrace. Time lost all meaning in the darkness. It could have been hours or days. We were climbing out of yet another passage when disaster struck. My foot found what felt like solid ground, but it shifted beneath my weight. I made a desperate grab for the tunnel's edge, but momentum had already claimed me. My flashlight went spinning away into the void as I fell, and for one strange, peaceful moment, I was floating in absolute darkness. The impact drove the air from my lungs. I landed on something that cracked and shifted beneath me, my head snapping back to connect with what felt like stone. When I managed to stand, pain blazed across my back. At least one serious cut, maybe more. Above me, two beams of light danced frantically. I could hear Missy and John calling down, their voices distorted by the cave's acoustics. Through some miracle, my flashlight had survived the fall. When I retrieved it and finally got a good look at my surroundings, I realized this chamber was different, larger, older. The pile I'd landed on, my stomach turned as I recognized the gleam of old bone, yellowed and brittle with age. This wasn't just another tunnel or chamber. This was something else entirely. The walls told stories. Some were clearly human, desperate prayers and pleas scratched into the stone. Others were different. They looked like attempts at human writing and drawing, but wrong somehow. Like whatever had made them understood the concept, but couldn't quite execute it properly. This wasn't just a cave. It was a prison. My mother's distinctive handwriting caught my eye, carved into the dirt wall. "Exit is up." The words explained the poorly patched ground I'd fallen through. But they also raised a haunting question. Had she escaped this place? Or were her bones mixed with the others beneath my feet? I looked around more, and a carving caught my eye immediately. Something about it seemed fresher than the ancient markings surrounding it. I struggled to make sense of what I was seeing. The crude lines formed something that shouldn't exist. A mass of twisted shapes that might have been limbs, though my mind rejected that interpretation. Two impossibly long appendages reached down from the central mass, and before it, tiny human figures knelt in what could only be worship. But it was what lay beneath the carving that truly grabbed my attention. A small opening, barely visible, where the earth seemed different, thinner somehow. I attacked it with desperate energy, kicking and scraping until my muscles burned. The dirt was like concrete, unyielding, but I could sense hollow space behind it. I slammed my flashlight against the weak spot again and again, watching the hole slowly widen. When it was finally large enough, I began tearing away chunks of packed earth with my bare hands. After one final heave, the passage opened before me. I glanced around, nervously. No sign of John or Missy. Taking a deep breath, I squeezed through. This tunnel was different from the others, somehow. It seemed to go on forever. Something pulled me forward, deeper, into this impossible place. Each step felt like surrendering a piece of my sanity. Yet I couldn't stop. ... The tunnel opened into another chamber, larger than the last. My flashlight beam swept across bare walls, finding no trace of the mysterious markings that had decorated the previous chambers. Then the light fell on something that made my heart stop. Larry, my little brother, lying peacefully on what looked like a pillow in the chamber's center, as if he'd been waiting for me all along. I rushed to him, shaking him desperately, but he remained unconscious. With no other choice, I hoisted him over my shoulder, surprised by his weight. He should have been emaciated after all this time, but his body felt solid, healthy, wrong somehow. Later I'd question this, but in that moment, all that mattered was that I'd found him alive. That's when I heard it. The sound that ripped through that underground chamber will haunt me until the day I die. It started as an inhuman shriek that clawed at my eardrums, a sound so high and piercing, I thought my head would split open. Then it transformed, melting into something deeper, wetter, a sound that belonged in the primordial ooze, where life first crawled from the sea. I turned, and my world shattered. My mother stood there. For one insane moment, I wanted to run to her, to embrace her with my free arm. But my mother had been gone for years, and this is just whatever wore her face now. I stood frozen, my muscles locked in terror. Then Missy's voice cut through the horror. "Matt, come on. I think we might have found a way out." She burst into the chamber and stopped dead, taking in the nightmare before her. The thing wearing my mother's face let loose another sound. Not a scream this time, but something worse. Something hungry. I was looking at Missy when it happened, and perhaps that's the only reason I retained my sanity. The sound of rending flesh filled the chamber, wet and thick, like someone tearing a wet leather coat. When I turned back, my mother's skin lay in ribbons on the ground, like discarded gift wrap. And what emerged? God help me, what emerged. It towered above us, easily 15 feet tall. Its gray skin an impossible contradiction. Ancient and cracked, like weathered stone in some places. Smooth and almost beautiful in others. The central mass of its body remained mercifully hidden within folding layers of flesh. But what protruded from between its countless arms defied comprehension. Organs, if you could call them that, pulsed with colors that had no right existing in our reality. Tubular structures, connected to throbbing sacs that seemed to serve some horrific purpose I couldn't begin to understand. The stench hit me then, ancient, sweet, and wrong, like honey mixed with grave dirt. For a moment that stretched into eternity, it just watched me. And in that moment, I felt something impossible. A connection. A conversation without words. It reached into my mind with thoughts that weren't thoughts, showing me things I still can't describe. It wanted something, desperately, but not Larry. No, it wanted something else. Something I still don't understand. Then it moved. Those impossibly long arms began to carry its massive bulk forward, smaller limbs scuttling underneath like the legs of some cosmic spider. The sight broke whatever spell had held me in place. I ran to Missy, who was already turning to flee. We found John waiting in the tunnel, and he immediately took Larry from me. Thank God for his football player's build. Missy pressed the gun into my trembling hands. Dot. This tunnel was massive compared to the others, with actual carved steps leading upward. We ran side by side, our footsteps echoing off ancient stone. The thunderous sounds behind us grew closer, and when I dared to look back, I saw those arms stretching toward us, bones cracking like gunshots as they extended far beyond what any limb should reach. I felt fingers like steel cables wrap around my ankle, and I went down hard. 7 shots rang out in the tunnel, the gun bucking in my hands as I fired at the grotesque limb. The bullets might as well have been spitballs. They didn't even draw blood. I fumbled for my pocket knife, but it slipped from my sweating hands as the thing began dragging me backward. John must have passed Larry to Missy, because suddenly he was there, slashing at the arm with savage desperation. The creature's screech of rage shook loose dust from the ceiling, and then, oh God, John, my best friend since 3rd grade. I tried to reach him, but another arm shot between us. I ducked and scrambled backward, realizing the creature couldn't stretch any further. But that knowledge came too late for John. What happened next? I won't. Let's just say death was probably a mercy, though it wasn't quick enough to be merciful. Does it make me a coward that I ran? That I left his body there, in that nightmare place? He was beyond saving. I tell myself that every day, but the guilt never leaves. I ran until my lungs burned, until I reached the top where Missy waited with Larry. One look at my face told her everything. Her knees gave out as the sobs started. "John," she whispered. I couldn't even shake my head. We'd emerged into what looked like an abandoned church, though everything about it felt wrong. The angles of the walls, the strange symbols carved into the rotting pews. The hatch we'd come through was massive, and it took both of us to seal it. Even through the thick wood and metal, we could hear its rage, its grief, its hunger. I'm still not sure which. We sat there in silence for what felt like hours, partly out of respect for John, partly because we simply couldn't process what had happened. The church probably held answers. It had to be connected to whatever dwelt below. But we couldn't bring ourselves to investigate. What was the room? Had we found it? None of it seemed to matter anymore. We had Larry back, but at what cost? The town we emerged into was unfamiliar. Some older section we'd never explored. People stared at us. 3 teenagers covered in dirt and blood, carrying an unconscious boy. Larry woke up at some point, but he wasn't really there. When I hugged him, it was like embracing a mannequin. Sheriff Reynolds was the first to question us. "Start from the beginning," he said, his pen hovering over his notepad. I watched his face as we told our rehearsed story, saw the moment he stopped believing us. "And John?" he pressed. "You're saying he just wandered off?" "We got separated," Missy said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. It was dark in those woods. The worst was Missy's mom. She'd always treated me like a second child, but that night in their kitchen, she looked at me like I was a stranger. "Matt," she said, gripping her coffee mug so tight I thought it might shatter. "I need the truth. What really happened to John?" I met her eyes, saw the fear there, the desperate need to understand. "We told you everything we know," I lied, hating myself for it. "Our dad was different. He didn't ask questions. Maybe he couldn't bear to. He just sat by Larry's bed in the hospital, holding his son's limp hand, whispering things I couldn't hear." That summer melted into a haze of half-truths and carefully constructed lies, each one tasting more bitter than the last. We spun our story about finding Larry in the White Woods, about John getting separated during the search. The words felt hollow even as we spoke them. People in town would nod along, their eyes saying what their mouths wouldn't, that they knew we were hiding something. But what could they do? The truth was too vast, too impossible for their small-town minds to hold. My father retreated into his bottles, drinking not to forget, but to blur the edges of something he seemed to recognize. I catch him sometimes, staring at Larry across the dinner table, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth, a look of raw terror flickering across his face before he drowned it in another gulp of whiskey. He knew something about that well, about what lived down there. But he took that knowledge to his grave 3 years later. Missy and I tried to keep our relationship alive, meeting in secret after her parents branded me dangerous, a bad influence. We'd sneak out to the old railroad bridge where the rust-stained metal still sang with memories of better days. Her hand would find mine in the darkness, but there was always a tremor in her touch now, a hesitation that hadn't been there before. We were like 2 survivors of a shipwreck, clinging to each other, but slowly drifting apart on separate pieces of debris. Larry, God, Larry was the worst part. My brother came back wrong. He was there, but not there. Like someone had hollowed him out and stuffed him full of cotton. I'd try to talk to him about normal things, baseball scores, girls, college plans, but his responses were always slightly off. Like an actor who'd memorized his lines, but didn't understand their meaning. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at nothing, his head tilted, as if listening to a conversation only he could hear. The brother I'd grown up with, the one who'd taught me to ride a bike and defended me from bullies, was gone. In his place was this uncanny duplicate that wore my brother's face, but couldn't quite remember how to use it properly. When I left for college 3 years later, I begged Missy to come with me. We stood in her backyard, the moon casting long shadows through the oak trees, and I poured out everything I'd been holding back. How I loved her. How we could start fresh, somewhere else, somewhere without the weight of that summer pressing down on us. She cried as she told me no, her fingers gripping my shirt so tight her knuckles went white. Her father was sick, cancer, and she couldn't leave him. I understood, but understanding didn't make it hurt any less. That night, as I drove away, I watched her shrinking figure in my rear-view mirror until she disappeared. Just like the brother I'd lost to the well. I spent the next decade building walls around those memories, convincing myself it had all been some mass hallucination brought on by trauma and teenage hormones. I got a job in a big city, bought a condo, dated women who'd never heard of my hometown. I became someone new, someone who'd never heard strange whispers echoing up from dark places. Then Missy called. Her voice on the phone was older, rougher around the edges, but still unmistakably hers. The fear in it hit me like a physical blow. Larry was gone again. 3 days missing. His wife found a notebook filled with strange drawings, circles within circles, and in the margins, over and over, the word waiting. Now, I'm on a plane, watching familiar countryside scroll past below, each mile bringing me closer to the place I swore I'd never return to. My hands haven't stopped shaking since I got her call. There's a weight in my chest, a mixture of dread and something else. Responsibility, duty. Whatever it is, it pulls at me like a hook behind my ribs. Because deep down, in that dark place where we keep the truths we can't face in daylight, I've always known this wasn't over. That thing in the well, that presence that spoke without words, it's been patient. It's been waiting. And somehow, I've always known I'd be back. Maybe I'm the only one who can end this. Or maybe I'm just the next chapter in its story. Either way, I'm going back to the well. Back to where it all began. Back to whatever's been waiting all these years for our return. My plane just landed. I'll update you whenever I can.